Yeah. And what do we see in history? So as an example, what's the history of infant baptism, Peter?
Well, and this is again going to have some differences of opinion. I think that Everett Ferguson is just a tremendous church historian, and he's written a lot on this. In fact, his latest book, I think it was published in 2015, if I remember correctly, is about 900 pages. It's not like bedtime reading, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, well,
He's going into the weeds, but he does such a great job. And the way I line up with the way he kind of summarizes things, and the way he would see it developing is again coming from a Baptist perspective. We're assuming, for the sake of argument right now, that credo baptism or believers baptism was the practice of the early church, and how infant baptism develops probably takes place in the second century, sometime in the mid second century. And part of the reason for that is because you have a lot of plagues coming in into the world during that time, into the Roman Empire, and a lot of believers during that time had errantly held to a belief of baptismal regeneration. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I'm sure. But with regard to this belief saying, okay, we don't want our kids to die of the plague because children are usually more susceptible to these kinds of things. And so we don't want them to die without eternal life. And so what we're going to do is we're going to baptize them if we see that they're in danger of dying. And so what probably happens now, the information is sparse here. And so we're putting together bits and pieces. There's inscriptions on some of these headstones for graves. There's also some early church writings where you have church fathers saying, if there's danger, then baptize the child. And so we're putting all these evidences together. And so it's likely that infant baptism becomes an issue or becomes a part of much of the church experience at some point during the second century. We have the first, clear evidence in the first part of the third century, around 205 AD, that it's being practiced with some regularity in the writings of Tertullian. And then as we get to the time of Augustine later on, it's by and large the main practice of the church at that point. And then from the time of Augustine to the time of the Reformation, it's, I was telling somebody the other day, you would likely not meet anybody who ever knew somebody who had not been baptized as an infant in the Roman Empire of that era.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. So what I didn't hear there was any Bible verses.
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? I also do not see infant baptism in the Bible, but I also recognize and want to acknowledge that there are different ways that you can argue for infant baptism.